I wasn't really planning to make a video on Hurry Up Tomorrow, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't catch my attention. After watching the film, I think it at least warrants a discussion, primarily because it's one of our biggest musical artists of our generation behind it. Hurry Up Tomorrow follows an insomniac musician that gets pulled into a nightmaric odyssey that unravels into the core of his existence. And with the utmost confidence, I can say that The Weeknd is one of the most insanely talented musicians that I have ever listened to in my entire life. I personally even turned a blind eye to The Idol. I think After Hours, Dawn FM, and Hurry Up Tomorrow are not only the perfect trilogy in a storytelling sense, but Dawn FM and After Hours are some of my favorite albums of all time. But honest to God, The Weeknd, stop jerking yourself off and calling it an art challenge, because there is a peaking moment in this film where Jenna Ortega is quote-unquote criticizing and diving into the music of The Weeknd, and it's basically just him dick-sucking himself because he wrote this film. Abel's past film and TV projects have never really moved me. If anything, they've really turned me away from ever seeing him on the big screen, because he plays himself in Uncut Gems, just being a dick, honestly. But aside from him, it's like a 10 out of 10 movie. And then The Idol, where he's somehow an even bigger dick. It's one of also the most inappropriately disgusting shows I've ever seen in my entire life. And that was produced by Sam Levinson, who's an absolute fucking freak, genuinely the freakiest producer in Hollywood. I would put money on it. But yeah, The Idol didn't seem too far out of The Weeknd's wheelhouse, because if you listen to a lot of his earlier music, he is freaky as hell. But also, he never really delved into the depth of mortality and persona and redemption until the After Hours trilogy, which is why I had at least a little bit more hope for this. Hurry Up Tomorrow stars Abel Tesfaye as himself, The Weeknd, Jenna Ortega as Anima, and Barry Keoghan as Lee. This was directed by Trey Edward Schultz, and his attachment was really the only thing that I felt like this movie had going for it. There's a lot more other things to talk about, but I want to start with the Trey Edward Schultz impact of it all. I just watched It Comes at Night for the very first time, and I think that movie is a pretty interesting dive into loneliness and isolation in a very condensed world. I thought that would translate really well into whatever The Weeknd was trying to do in Hurry Up Tomorrow, trying to keep it a personal story, even in this grand scheme of his overall trilogy arc. But this is just the most pretentious filmmaking I've ever seen. Like The Weeknd is I don't want to be a dick, but this guy cannot act. I will start with the other two performances though, because they are actual actors and they do pretty well for the material that they're given. Barry Keoghan is in this film. He is not that great, but he just doesn't have great material to work with. Jenna Ortega is really playing opposite of Abel here, and she does good for acting opposite fucking wood. It all just lacks character depth, and it's weird because The Weeknd as this persona is someone we already know a lot about. And this talks about, you know, the split between the drugs and the toxicity, and I can't take myself serious when I'm talking about this because it doesn't really feel like the movie does either. I'm not going to talk about spoilers here, but I have to mention this one line because it is genuinely baffling when you find out that The Weeknd had a big part in writing this film. Jenna Ortega, to The Weeknd's face, says, "Are you the toxic one?" I swear to God, I have seen music YouTube reactions give more depth into music than this. The only time I think Abel's acting isn't absolutely atrocious is in the first half of the film, when it's more so based in the concert aspect of it all. But I think it's also because he's not really acting. Like, this is The Weeknd. This is what he has to go through night in and night out on tour. There's a specific scene. It is, if I'm not mistaken, a one-take sequence with Barry Keoghan and Abel kind of sitting head to head and really having a heart-to-heart about the evolution of this tour and the double persona inside of The Weeknd. And that definitely feels like more of what the core of the film is going for. But then when you get to Jenna Ortega's character, who, without giving any major spoilers away, is trying to take advantage of him to an extent through the excuse of trying to understand him, that's kind of just what I got out of it. Nothing is ever consistent enough with the character storytelling to actually make an impact. They do actually reference real life things from The Weeknd, obviously because he is playing himself. One of the funniest things was when Barry Keoghan just randomly mentions The Idol, and he says, you know, it's just a one-off thing, like he just wanted to try something new. And it's funny because this movie, it's not necessarily like The Freakend like everyone was not hoping for, but I mean, he still just can't act, so it doesn't work. No one takes him seriously. Now I want to kind of get into the album part of this all, because obviously Hurry Up Tomorrow, we got this album 4 months ago, and I still don't think it's amazing. It really prioritizes storytelling over actually being a music piece, which might work for some people, but technically it just felt very, very inconsistent with me. And overall, there's just way more misses in the track list than say Dawn FM or After Hours, which I'd say not only have better overall track lists, but they also ingrain story really well into the technical and lyrical aspects of the album. Anyways, back to the movie. There's a couple of songs that I could instantly think of while watching the film because thematically they literally feel like one for one things that the film dives into in terms of the psyche of The Weeknd and this dying persona. For me personally, tracks like Reflections Laughing, Enjoy the Show, Hurry Up Tomorrow, and Wake Me Up are really able to encapsulate the story and thematic essence of the film, but at the same time, I don't really think the film ever reaches the highs of that technical storytelling in the album. For me, a track that I really go back to and not only listen to a lot, but just find myself like geeking over is After Hours. It's a 6-minute masterclass. It feels like a film in and of itself, and really nothing in the Hurry Up Tomorrow album stands on its own that high. Judging Hurry Up Tomorrow as a cohesive piece makes it a lot better, but this film does have a narrative at its forefront that really only takes pieces of that album, and so the album's story really falls flat. Obviously, I'm viewing this in not just a film format, but obviously it's going to be really difficult to separate 3 whole albums, like 3.5, 4 hours of musical content from a under 2-hour film that's the same name as his album. I do feel like they go hand in hand to an extent, but there's obviously still core things that work about the movie just on a film level and core things that don't work as well. There are some really interesting references though, just in terms of how this connects back to the album. One of my friends is a massive The Weeknd fan, and he was mainly excited for this film because of the album references and the references to The Weeknd's history. There are literally moments where he's being baptized in fear, or he can't be alone again, or he can't fucking sing. I mean, we all know how it goes. We've all heard this album a million times. It does fit into the story, and so when The Weeknd did say that this really translated into the album and not the other way around, I definitely see that. But after hearing the album first, which I feel like you have to think about the way that your projects, these art projects, are released, it definitely just feels like he's referencing it for fan service, which is just really odd. I don't know, nothing really hits. None of the emotional beats work. I think the first half is definitely stronger than the second half, but I don't really think it's because of one thing or another. It's more so just The Weeknd is more interesting than Abel and Jenna Ortega talking in a hotel room. One place I can at least give this film a little bit of flowers is visually. I think the stuff in the first half with the concerts is executed really, really well. This is shot on 35 and 16 millimeter film, and you can really tell. I think the composition works for the most part. A lot of the tripping out sequences are also executed really well. I did feel the impact of that all, and it helped me understand the psyche of Abel a little bit better. But all the technical stuff aside, I also understand why this film was sitting in post-production for over a year, because I don't really know who this movie is for aside from people that specifically like Hurry Up Tomorrow, not even The Weeknd as a whole, like just this album. At the end of the day, this kind of just feels like a very surface level and unnecessary explanation and delve into The Weeknd's identity problem. And the only reason I say unnecessary is because every single one of his musical works does it better. So I don't really see the need for this piece of art, which I hate to say, but he himself has made better pieces that talk about the same exact thing. So it kind of just all feels irrelevant. Overall, I'm going to give Hurry Up Tomorrow a 5 out of 10. If you've seen or want to check out Hurry Up Tomorrow, obviously let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.